and welcome to our session today to speak about urban resilience and climate change roadmap under the Making Cities Resilience Program 2030. Allow me first to welcome our panelists, Ms. Laila Mustafa Abdul Latif, Director General of Emirates Nature, the WWF, and Ms. Samira Arrayes, the Director of Policy and Strategy, the Sustainable Development of the General Secretariat of the Executive Council of Dubai. Mr. Sujit Mohanty, the Chief of UNDRR Regional Office for the Arab States, and Mr. Bernard Bath, the Human Settlement Specialist at the UN Habitat. So, as we all know, our future is urban. In 30 years' time from now, as many as 2/3 of us will live in urban areas. And definitely, cities are the drivers of economic development and social progress. In recent years, losses associated with climate-related hazards have increased considerably. These trends are expected to become more and more with the global population growth and rapid urbanization. People and assets in cities are increasingly exposed to hazards. We need to be prepared and to get our cities resilient. How can we achieve this? How can we achieve climate parity between adaptation and mitigation? How can we scale up community resilience? And how can we unlock the climate finance for most vulnerable communities? Together, today, we are gathered to discuss and see our future, which will lead us from COP27 to COP28 hosted in Dubai. My first question to Mr. Sujit Mohanty, from the perspective of UNDRR, how can we achieve climate parity between adaptation and mitigation?
Thank you, Rania. Thank you, Rania, and very good afternoon, colleagues. So if you talk about parity between mitigation and adaptation, I think it's not either or, first of all, or it's not a choice. I mean, it has to be, while the efforts towards mitigating the climate impact, which is mitigating the emissions, avoiding and reducing emissions goes on, we have to put more effort on adapting to the changing climate or reducing risk of vulnerable populations. Now, as I said, it's not either or, the efforts has to be in both. But what we are seeing is that the mitigation effort is perhaps not enough or maybe not in the same pace as we wish. Hence, we cannot wait for these effects to really take over us and create more and more disasters. And the trend, unfortunately, shows that there are more extreme events, there are more disasters, climate-related disasters happening. So it's really imperative that we invest more on reducing risk, vulnerability reduction, strengthening people, strengthening communities so that they can withstand the impact of climate change. And I think it's not just about investing in adaptation, but is also strengthening community, it's also strengthening institutions. Everything goes hand in hand. And at the same time, the effort for minimizing emission has to go on.
Surely. So, and that leads to another question to Ms. Laila. The climate change adaptation and mitigation are both equally important, as we all know, and they are time sensitive as well. So, how can we do both together from your perspective?
Thank you for the question. I think what we're talking about here essentially is climate resilient development. It's factoring in adaptation and mitigation along with those enabling conditions to advance sustainable development.
Yes.
And we need to look at solutions that have those co-benefits across both. From an urban planning perspective, it's about integrating climate adaptation measures, whether it be looking at the implications of sea level rise within your urban planning process. For urban built environments, it's about retrofitting, for example, as a form of climate mitigation. But what's important as well is to look at nature-based solutions as a tool that can tackle both. And this is an area that we tend to focus on as Emirates Nature WWF. It's really looking at that triple helix of mitigation, adaptation, as well as conserving biodiversity. And if it's planned correctly, whether it be green public spaces and infrastructure through reforestation or stormwater management, through coastal mangroves or coastal ecosystem protection and restoration, you're not only getting benefits from a human well-being and development perspective, but you're also managing those true carbon sinks.
Right.
In the UAE, we do have quite a bit of experience on NBS on the ground, and the panelist before me, my colleague Marina, sitting in the crowd, actually touched upon this in the earlier panel. But we have a project where we're looking at how can we pilot out nature-based solution examples and pilot projects across 2 Emirates in the UAE, in Al Quwain and as well in Abu Dhabi, whereby we're actually doing blue carbon ecosystem assessments to look at carbon capture stocks within the ecosystems in the Emirates, and we're trying to identify what are the ecosystem values and services that those coastal blue carbon sinks provide, and what are the societal and economic values of that as well. And we're trying to also identify how can we support the creation of bankable nature-based solutions, whereby we're looking at projects that either have a food and water security or an ecotourism commercial benefit, where SMEs can invest into the Emirates as well, and look at nature-based solutions that create that commercial return on investment as well. So it's really important to come up with a large portfolio of projects that essentially do both from a climate mitigation and adaptation perspective.
100%. We are so happy to hear about all these initiatives and looking forward as well to share experiences with other countries and on the local level with other cities. Now, from the perspective of city leadership, Ms. Samira, climate change is a serious problem, as you know. Limiting the effects of climate change is necessary to achieve the sustainable development. Now, the question is the fact that what is Dubai plan? We know that Dubai joined the race to address climate change, and we would love to hear more about what Dubai is doing currently, noting that Dubai is hosting, on behalf of the United Arab Emirates, COP28 2023.
Thank you for asking me this question. It's great to be here with you all. So first, it is essential for the cities to have a good governance in order to have the clear and ambitious climate action. Back in Dubai, in earlier stage in 2009, we realized the importance of having a governing body to lead the development of climate action in Dubai. So the Energy Council of Dubai was formed with the different stakeholders from the key players and key sectors such as energy, economy, infrastructure, waste, and industry. So in 2009, we started with a platform to understand the sources of CO2 emission across different sectors. We set and defined the tools and mechanism to monitor and to measure the CO2 emission. By 2014, we were able to announce our first carbon abatement strategy with ambitious target for Dubai, and we were able to set the baseline for our emissions. And nowadays, we are in the phase of updating our strategy, our carbon abatement strategy, in line with the national targets and goals. So in the coming years, we are going to put more plan and policies to align with the national agenda, with focusing on 5 main sectors: water and power, transportation, industry, waste, and the building sector.
Right, excellent. If you may allow me with a quick follow-up question. We all know the role of
Yes.
the private sector,
Yeah.
especially in Dubai, as we have the Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction with the support, of course, of the Executive Council. How do you see the value and the importance of their engagement?
Actually, Dubai is a business hub, as you know, and a logistics hub. So what we are doing in Dubai, we are focusing on developing the business without impacting the resilience and sustainable aspect. So resilience is much important. It comes in collaboration between the private and public sector. Not only private and public sector, we also engage the researcher, the academics,
Yeah.
and the youth, and from the different citizen groups to involve in that strategy. Nowadays, we are the first city to become as a resilience hub, and we are so proud of what we achieved in Dubai. And this came because of the collaboration and the aligned strategies between the private and the public sector. So we started with developing the framework of the resilience according to Sendai framework. We developed on the Dubai level, and after that, that was cascaded in different sectors. So in each sector, we identified the opportunities for Dubai to become more resilient. And after that, we identified also the program and the goals to achieve the resilience goals. Nowadays, we are the first hub for the resilience on the world. And also we are we are targeting to achieve more
Milestones.
measures and scores in the future.
Thank you so much, Ms. Samira. Mr. Bernard, another arm for the United Nations working closely with UNDRR on urban resilience. My question to you is, how can we put in place appropriate mitigation measures?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. And of course, a really good opportunity to connect this COP with the next COP in Dubai. If you allow me, I'll like to zoom out a little bit. For us, of course, it's also critical to link adaptation, mitigation, and we would normally go even further than that. There is a framework of SDG localization, really an integrated development approach. Adaptation and resilience and climate change mitigation all need to be part of a planning process. And if taken all into consideration early on in that planning process, then hopefully the co-benefits that you've spoken about can be addressed. Also, issues of governance can feed into the process directly. And ideally, of course, an urban systems approach is taking up, for example, the nature-based solutions where that makes sense. And as we've heard, in most cases it does. Maybe in terms of specific mitigation actions, yes, of course, we have from UN Habitat programs on low emission development that are very much focusing on sector interventions, promoting good practices, best practices. We have in UN Habitat a Climate Smart Cities Challenge, which is particularly about climate change mitigation, identifying complex mitigation challenges that cities articulate. We support them then in further articulating them and match them with innovators towards implementation. And we also, as UN Habitat, partner with the city networks, in particular the Global Covenant of Mayors on Climate and Energy, on the Innovate for Cities initiative. We have a biannual conference to really identify good practices and ensure that they work locally. And if I can just make a pitch here to bring us back to the integrated approach, the COP presidency here, the Egyptian COP presidency, is launching a Sustainable Cities initiative, branded search initiative that ICLE as a local government network and UN Habitat have been doing the pen holding for. And whilst this is very much at the core a Sustainable Cities initiative that brings together the different dimensions that I've mentioned, we have 5 particular entry points: housing and buildings, energy, water, waste and mobility. And deliberately for those sectors, we have developed a mechanism that they are both, that all 5 of them equally focus on adaptation and mitigation. And the sector entry point is meant not to create silos, but help to develop pathways for rapid implementation. And we hope, of course, that with the launch of this initiative, we can connect then also to Dubai and the next COP. I
Great.
apologize for the long
No,
response.
thank you so much. We value all the efforts UN Habitat is doing, and we look forward to jointly work together as well with the different cities around the world to achieve the objectives of our work. This takes me to another question, Mr. Sujit. And as Ms. Samira, she referred to the Resilience Hub, Dubai being the first on a global level. Sharm el-Sheikh was announced today to be the first African Resilience Hub, which is under the Making Cities Resilience Program 2030. Please tell us more about MCR 2030 and why it's important.
Thanks, Rania. So the MCR 2030, which is, and again, another acronym we're throwing into this, is called the Making Cities Resilient 2030 program, which is a global initiative from a number of agencies. It's a program that is globally co-created with multiple partners, which includes also our colleagues from UN Habitat, ICLEI, UCLG, and there are a number of other organizations. Now, the whole idea was that you bring cities together to learn from each other, bring service providers, those who can provide solutions on board, those who can help cities to really plan towards resilience. It has a very methodical approach of how do you diagnose your challenges, issues, and how do you plan for resilience. So it is a very comprehensive program that allows city-to-city learning, that allows solution providers to connect with each other, connect with cities, and make their journey towards resilience. And I would just want to share with all colleagues that it's a program which is a follow-up from an initiative which was launched back in 2010. It was called Making Cities Resilient campaign. From the campaign, we got into the next stage, which is really resilience planning with cities until 2030. There are around 1,400 cities have joined, and there are a number of cities who actually, in a way, stepped up. They took more responsibility. They took the responsibility of not only making their cities resilient, but helping other cities to become resilient. And I'm really proud to say that we got the first global first resilience hub was Dubai, who took this actually on their shoulder to really support other cities, work with other cities while they're working with in Dubai to make it resilient. And they have been also now supporting, I think, other cities in the Emirates. We have the Sharm el-Sheikh, which was declared today as the Africa's first resilience hub. Now, the idea of creating this resilience hub, which are, I think, 16 or 17 globally now, is that we need leaders, those who can actually support other cities to learn from each other, but at the same time provide some solution on specific issues. Because we know that one UN DRR or one UN Habitat or one UN, any organization cannot do it. I mean, it has to be a partnership, a true partnership that can bring everyone together and do it. In this program, we are aiming at getting more cities joined up. Another interesting side of this program is that we also have private sector as service provider. So if cities are willing to find even private sector service provider, it's like a marketplace where you can connect with anyone to get solutions, or you want to put some solutions out there for other cities to use, that's also possible. So it's gaining really a very good momentum. More and more cities are joining. More and more cities are kind of stepping up to become resilience hubs, and we would like to see more partners joining, more cities joining in this program.
Thank you, Mr. Mohanty, and we definitely rely on this program to build the capacity of the local level in the cities and all governments to make sure that they are able to achieve their resilience. So, Ms. Laila, again, tell us how the Emirates Nature WWF is contributing to building community resilience in at the local level. So, what is your role exactly, and how you are doing that?
Thank you. I think building on the earlier response, in order to achieve community resilience, it's really important to have a multi-stakeholder approach and to ensure that there's inclusivity and buy-in in decision-making from the very beginning. It's important to raise awareness and provide information on climate risks within the planning process. It's important to strengthen capacity across all communities, but also to integrate nature-based solutions. And building up essentially these solutions within the local communities is what we focus on as Emirates Nature WWF. It's really that bottom-up approach whereby we can pilot out solutions that are locally crafted within cities, but also in the rural communities, because that's where you get those customized solutions that are super innovative as well. We do have quite a large portfolio of work within the rural communities or the Northern Emirates in the UAE, whereby we work very closely with local farmers to look at solutions from a food and water security perspective. So it's about integrating agroecological principles within their farming systems to achieve sustainable and resilient communities. And that by default, as we know, has a link to climate adaptation, but also to climate mitigation, because they're looking at creating those resilient communities along the way, whilst addressing food and water security risks tied to climate hazards within that particular sector. Now, we work with local farmers to create sustainable model farms across the different communities. We've also previously worked with them to restore and regenerate the traditional irrigation system, so the felaj, the aflaj. That saves water, but of course it also increases crop yield. And now, especially linked to climate risks and climate hazards, which we know have an impact on the supply chain of crops, of meat, of fish, we're looking at how can we strengthen that aspect as well. And we're working with local farmers to look at nature-positive labels for those farmers that have actually achieved nature-based solutions within their farming practices, but also how do we support them from a commercialization perspective and look at what policy instruments need to be put in place in partnership with the UAE government to strengthen sustainable agriculture.
Excellent.
Thank you.
think we need to have you on board on the MCR program ASAP.
Love to. Would love.
Thank you so much. Ms. Samira, the Executive Council, of course, plays a big role. As the climate emergency is very intensive, the public and private sector need to unite and to address the increasing threat. You've mentioned that there are several initiatives that bring them together. But looking forward now towards the COP28, is there a plan in place to really make sure that there is a concrete outcome and solid initiative that can be announced at COP28?
For sure. Actually, the climate action is not a single action from one entity. It's a collaboration efforts between the private and public sector. As I mentioned before, not only public and private, also including the researcher and the different, segment in the community. So in Dubai, as part of our approach in developing any policy or any project, we engage with the private sector from the early stage. Once we identify the area of the policy, we engage with the private sector in very early stage to identify the opportunity for Dubai. We have a lot of examples in Dubai. For example, we have the circular economy strategy, the circular economy strategy, in the early stage, we engaged with the private sector to identify the different opportunities across different sectors. For example, in the construction, we identified the opportunity for Dubai to become more circular and to close that loop. In addition, for the waste sector, for example. So we engage with the private sector in very early stage to identify the different opportunities for Dubai. Other example, in Dubai, when we develop the policies on the Emirates level, it's been always cascaded on the private sector. We have, for example, in the Dubai Chamber Group for Sustainable Network, where we have the businesses, they meet with the private and public sector to sit together and to find the different opportunities and to bridge the gaps. So we have in Dubai, other example is the sustainable city in Dubai. It's one of the main project that came from the real estate, from a private developer. He developed a sustainable city, and he was able to reduce 1,000 tons of CO2 emission in 1 year, and that equivalent around roughly, I can say, 900 cars on the road. So this kind of the collaboration we are targeting in Dubai, the collaboration and the approach top down and down top. So this is the way how we are managing our projects in Dubai.
Thank you, Ms. Samira. This is very great to know. Mr. Bernard, the greatest challenge for climate change adaptation is building resilience for the most vulnerable people. So what is UN Habitat doing to support them to make sure that they are resilient as needed?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, first of all, for us, and I mentioned that before, it's critical to have an integrated city plan that looks at the system overall. And we have always done that with an emphasis on vulnerable people, vulnerable places, and vulnerable institutions to look into resilience comprehensively. And our climate change initiative started in 2008, so there's a lot of experience from cities around the world, and a lot of projects have followed from that. However, I think it's important, and that's what your question implies, is how do we go to scale? How do we move from those initiatives that are slow, that are maybe driven to some extent by UN Habitat or depend on the support, to a much more concerted effort. And one of the key challenges is that out of the 11,000 cities or so that have committed to climate change, only a good 1,000 have actually started to fully implement their plans. And so from our perspective, it's critical to not only build the local capacities, but to put in the policies, the plans, the legislation at the national level to really scale this up. But if I take your question really to the community level, and to give you some examples, we have as one of our flagship programs as UN Habitat the Resilient Informal Settlements initiative. So really looking at the most vulnerable communities, working, of course, with the city level, but really identifying at the community level the particular vulnerabilities, identify globally also those hotspots where urban vulnerability and climate vulnerability overlays, and then to focus on those, support these communities with their specific needs. And there is no cookie-cutter approach that can be housing related, basic services related, but also livelihoods related, for example.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take the discussion towards something different, which we all think about and try to find solution, which is investing in disaster risk reduction, investing in building resilient communities. And my question is to Mr. Sujit, as you may know, that since 2010, our spending on humanitarian response has been increasing. Our spending to respond to the needs is getting greater. Nevertheless, we need to direct our investments in disaster risk reduction to prevent the disasters from happening and reduce the risk that's coming out from it. So, how can we do that?
Thanks, Rania. So, as an organization, we are the United Nations Organization for Disaster Risk Reduction, and what do we do is essentially work with countries and communities to reduce the impact of disasters, to minimize losses, minimize the impact on people, on their livelihood, as well as the broader economic losses. So essentially, our organization always advocates for minimizing losses, preparing for disasters, as well as reducing the risk and managing risk, which essentially means that we want to move away from having more disasters, more humanitarian crisis. Unfortunately, it's not happening. I mean, it's not happening because of many reasons. It's not just the increased impact of the climate change, but it's also conflict. It's also many other reasons which is really making humanitarian investment. I would not actually say it investment, humanitarian spending more and more. And I said that's not an investment. Of course, it's helping people, but it's again, we are actually sort of now getting into a spiral where you have a disaster, you provide assistance, you humanitarian assistance, again another disaster, the same people, same fundings or same support. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a need. If it is, people need to eat. If somebody has to feed them when they're in need. But the philosophy of the organization is that make people stronger, so that next time you have a disaster, they're not seeking external support, but they're strong enough to support themselves. And I oversimplified it perhaps, but when you look at humanitarian support, we have to somehow change this cycle. Every year, almost 30 billion US dollar of worth of humanitarian spending happens. It can be seen as something good, that okay, there are people or countries helping others, but at the same time we have to realize that we have to somewhere minimize these so that people are strengthened. Rather, we should have resources that allows people to be stronger to withstand risk. Not only people, but our infrastructure, everything has to be strengthened, that moves us towards resilience. We can minimize our losses, we can minimize the suffering of people, so that you don't spend always on humanitarian support. Having said that, it's not going to be that easy. Every year we are seeing also an increase in humanitarian spending. I think if we look at every year, almost I would say $1 billion increase is happening. Last year it was in 2020 it was 30 billion. 2021 it became 31 or 32. So it is in an increasing order. We have to somehow stop this. And I'm not saying that stop humanitarian support. Of course, when people need the support, you do that. But I think the investment should go more into people's adaptive capacity, resilience of infrastructure, upgrading infrastructure or strengthening infrastructure. Even those infrastructure which are newly built, we have to really think that even if it requires additional amount of money to strengthen them now.
Yeah.
Rather than they fall and then you have to retrofit, or then you have to. So I think proactive planning on these is something which is really essential. The Secretary General announced a 5-year ambitious plan of early warning to all. That's again in the same principle that you strengthen people, you provide early warning, access to information so they are prepared. So I think those investments really has to be thought through. We have to put more sort of financing investment into adaptation, into risk reduction, early warning, that will make, I think, our society stronger, which can withstand disasters. Otherwise, we'll be in the same cycle of,
Definitely.
repeating disaster
Yeah.
relief, disaster relief, and then it never ends.
Thank you, Mr. Sujit. And of course, we all are looking forward to the success of the initiative that was announced by the Secretary General, early warning for all by 2027. And we are working all together to achieve this initiative. Ms. Leila, WWF definitely is funding a lot of initiatives and projects. Are you facing any financial challenges, and how do you face these challenges?
Well, I think to take a step back and building on that as well, I mean, we've just heard how humanitarian efforts have increased by 1 billion a year due to natural disasters. So there's definitely a need to push climate finance towards massive and immediate investments into clean energy, into sustainable cities, into coastal management, smart agriculture, and look at how can we essentially address dealing with the root cause and looking at investments into smarter sectors. We definitely see financial institutions as a key lever in that advancement towards sustainable outcomes. Financial institutions play a key role in essentially factoring in environmental implications into their own lending and investment decisions. It's also important that they provide those financial instruments and tools to invest in high-impact conservation projects on the ground as well. With regards to challenges, definitely trying to move away from pure government and philanthropic funding, as the financing required on the ground far outstrips that, into more private capital is a challenge, because when we talk about projects on the ground and nature-based solutions projects, they tend to lack that deal size and risk-return ratio to match that private capital. And so we really need to identify other financial instruments, blended finance as well, that can de-risk the portfolio projects on the ground to make it more attractive for private sector impact investors, for example. When crafting nature-based solution projects on the ground, it's very time-intensive, it's very resource-intensive, and so it's also important to look at financing at that early stage that can enable essentially the experimentation phase of these projects, the piloting of these projects, to identify how can you get the right commercial return of investment. Scaling up NBS projects and conservation projects on the ground essentially require that multi-stakeholder partnership approach that we've talked about a lot. It's about bringing on board the scientists, the local communities, the investors, the philanthropists, the financial institutions, the governments, all to look at how can they put in place a strong methodology as well that identifies the right model that will give you the right commercial return on investment that can be replicated and can be replicated rapidly as well.
Definitely.
And so this is the work that we're trying to do in the road up to COP28, try to identify a few small-scale projects that can provide a return on investment and that can prove the model of climate mitigation and adaptation whilst conserving biodiversity at the same time.
Thank you, Ms. Leila. Ms. Samira, we know that the Dubai Executive Council always capitalize on a challenge to make it an opportunity. So with regards to financing disaster risk reduction and facing the challenges that we are facing with all sectors, what is the plan at Dubai Executive Council?
Actually, the concept of green finance, maybe it's not that mature in the region. And we need a lot of education for the public and private sector, including the financial resources. Because nowadays, if we take the definition of the financial or green finance, it's differs from one country to other country, from one region to other region, from one source of the financial to other source. Maybe we need to have the clear definition and clear understanding what is the green finance. This is from one angle. From the other angle, we need also to have this education and collaboration between the different parties including the academics and the financial resources to come together and to identify the different opportunities. And this is the way we are working now in Dubai to actually to bring the banks and the financial and investors together on the table to identify the opportunities and to sit and direct the financial towards achieving the aims and the goals for Dubai. So I think there is other aspect we should also enforce the public and private sector. It's the lack of data. Maybe nowadays for developing any project, we need really to understand the situation for each priority. To understand that, we need actually a proper data from the private sector, from the different sector, to put together and to have the clear understanding for the current gaps and the challenges we have. So based on that, we can direct the finance and the investors towards the right investment in Dubai. So those are the area I consider it the area of improvements, the area that we can focus more in the future.
Definitely, Ms. Leila, that is what's needed for risk assessment, to understand better, to be able to plan in a better way. Bernard, UN Habitat, with all the initiatives, all the projects that you are working on, definitely funding and financing these projects is essential. So how are you facing the challenges of financing it?
Yeah, let me not, in a way, respond to UN Habitat's resource mobilization in support of cities. Of course, that is important, and we act, for example, as multilateral implementing entity to support cities and governments to channel global climate finance to them. But that's a drop in the ocean. And again, I know I'm repeating a little bit what I've said earlier. It's critical that national frameworks are in place that make it very clear what needs to happen at the local level, and that includes finance. And if I may put this out here, everything needs to be now climate finance. There should not be a distinction anymore between climate finance and other finance, or between climate investment or other investments. And of course, it's critical to look at that, as I said earlier, in an integrated way, linking this to sustainable development more broadly. And if national frameworks are in place that are translated to the local level, then that also makes it clearer where the finance needs to go, how it needs to go. The mechanisms need to be in place for global finance to go to the national level, to go to the local level, and to reach the most vulnerable. And yeah, just not repeating what the other speakers have said. I mean, there are so many different entry points. There are important mechanisms for private sector engagement and blended finance, and all of that needs to come together. And it's critical to have those frameworks in places. And maybe just to end, from our perspective in UN Habitat, or one of the initiatives that we do support, of course, is building the capacities at the local level, and that includes, of course, the planning that I've mentioned before, that then also needs to be aligned with the national level, but it also relates then to the development of bankable projects. And we have then different mechanisms of support for cities. There are facilities that develop these types of projects with the cities. We have also run a number of investment fora where different funders come together. And that can be international climate finance mechanisms, national development banks, but also the private sector. And it's important to have not just little projects prepared, but a broader strategy, a broader plan that requires finance, and that then has entry points for different sources of funding.
Thank you, Bernard. And I hope everyone as well is aligned with your perspective that everything should be climate change financing. So I wouldn't say a statement at the end because we are concluding. Nevertheless, a call for action from each of the respective panelists might want to address the audience with.
That's tricky. Well, not really a call for action, but really, I mean, we would like to see that COP28 will be essentially a very good opportunity again for us to get together, look at all these issues of investments, financing, and so on. But since you asked me single out a call for action, I would like to see this, solution sharing, solutions with, what I think I heard even in this forum. Of course, the issues of investments, financing will be there. But I think countries are really progressing very well. They have innovative solutions. I heard in this forum multiple times talking about nature-based solution. Even in the UN, when we start talking to countries about nature-based solutions, it's not really fully understood. It's not really fully sort of used or comprehended well. But I see countries like UAE, they're already sort of talking about solutions based on nature-based solutions for risk reduction. I think these are innovative, and these are the examples that need to be shared with others. I think that's really becomes important, that in a global forum like COP, it really provides that opportunity of this cross linkages, sharing with others. So that should be our call for action, that we increase this potential of learning. Maybe the resilience hub could be a place where this cross learning happens.
Thank you.
So I think that should be a call for action from our side, that we engage more with the solution providers, those who can provide good examples, and those who can actually teach other at the same time, learn from others. That would be great.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Mr. Mohanty. Ms. Laila.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's extremely important that we all connect together, especially
Yes.
all of us on the panel here today. But it's really about that multi-stakeholder approach. And we've got a very busy year ahead of us. I think we all realize that, being here in Egypt in COP27 and in the road up to the next COP, inshallah.
Inshallah.
But it's a year full of opportunities and experimentation and piloting. But it's truly important to connect those dots together and look at how do you enhance then rapid replication. Because we don't have time to all be doing independent streams of work. We need to really focus on pushing those rapid
Together.
replication
Yeah.
across different models of solutions.
Thank you, Ms. Laila. Ms. Amira.
I think, we need to work towards implementation. We need to act together quickly and fast towards achieving the net zero by 2050. So it's all about the collaboration, sharing the best practice, networking, and working together.
Thank you, Ms. Amira. Mr. Bernard.
Yeah, I think we all agree. Of course, we need to move to action, to much more implementation. This is the implementation COP, and we need that acceleration. Maybe just to highlight a few key points that I've mentioned that are critical in that context. It's systems thinking. In our context, maybe urban systems. It's, of course, the capacities. It is the multi-stakeholder action. It's very much the multi-level climate action. It's the finance, and it's the connection towards innovation, the technology sharing.
Thank you so much. And lastly, I thank you all for being here today, discussing this crucial, important topic on urban resilience. I thank all the audience for being with us today. And if there's any question before we conclude from the audience, I would love to have it. Yes, please.
There's a lot of research in the last 20 years about resilience in the sense of people's feeling of security. Do they trust their leadership in the city? And do they trust that their neighbors, they're close by? So there's two layers here, way before the government and the region. And when you study resilience and you talk with the municipality, and many times they say they lack knowledge, they lack information. One of the projects was, I want to ask you, one of the pilot that we're doing now is combining a new model of municipality officials with academics to find solutions together with local input, especially traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge. My question to you is, how relevant would the academia be for you in building these resilience in the city? And how capable is it for you to get local responses and be able to respond to what locals tell you?
Thank you. Who would like to take the answer? Bernard?
I'm happy to go first.
Please.
Yes, we do work a lot with universities, certainly in the space of climate change. The co-creation is critically important. We have many good experiences also over many years, but I also remember conversations with universities, and I'm not naming names, they say, oh yeah, that would actually be interesting to work locally. They have all of these study tours to other places, and that's a university in Africa, and they have a big urban planning program and nothing connecting to their city. So these problems clearly exist, but it shouldn't be too difficult to connect, and I think everyone understands the importance of co-creation and working with the resources that you locally have, including universities.
Yeah, I think just taking on from my colleague from Habitat, academia's involvement in resilience planning, discussion, or any stage is extremely important. I mean, in fact, you can't like do without them in a way. And there are many examples that academia is fully engaged in different capacities, whether it's really bringing the research into policy making, or even creating awareness, or even preparing the next generation, that's the students in universities into this whole discussion of resilience. I think, since we are in the UAE pavilion, I will just take one example, is that the private sector network in UAE engages with the government, the public sector, but also with academia. For example, the Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction worked very closely with the American University in Dubai, who have now courses which is running with Dubai government, and they give diploma on resilience. I think there are a lot of these kind of examples which you'll see public sector, private sector, academia working together to curate a diploma program or something where they can engage students. And what we also saw, that these are not only students from UAE, these are international students coming from different parts.
Yes.
Sorry, traditional knowledge.
Traditional knowledge, yes.
Well, in the context where traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge, as you said, is also extremely important, and those where there is a sort of engagement of institution dealing with indigenous knowledge, or institutions with traditional knowledge, they're definitely part of it. And I think it also connects to the nature-based solution, which is these solutions, whether they're indigenous knowledge or nature-based solution, these are now termed as most cost-effective way of actually doing resilience. You can have technology coming from outside, but not necessarily appropriate for that, for this the given context. But indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge is much more appropriate. And sometimes we feel that if we don't put a conscious effort to connect this is sometimes lost and is not taken on board. So that's, I think, is the importance of getting them on board as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mohanty. Any additions from Samira, Leila?
Yeah, thank you, Sujit, for that example. This is exactly what I was to say. Nowadays, in the UAE, we have what we call the Youth Hub. The Youth Hub, we bring the different youth representing different universities and college across UAE, and we give them certain problems for them to research and to find the solution for those challenges on the national level. So we have this collaboration, a systematic collaboration between the government and also the academic to bring the talents on the table to resolve and to come with a solution to resolve the challenges that we have. And for example, in the resilience, the last event that we had in Dubai, we worked closely with 15 universities across United Arab Emirates. We asked them to find a different way to think differently with certain challenges we are facing in Dubai, and they came with a lot of idea where we can incorporate it in our, in our projects.
Thank you. Leila, any additions from your side?
I think a lot of information was already highlighted, but just to add, I mean, we do follow this bottom-up approach quite consciously, and it's important to work with the local communities. We work very much with the local tribes across the different emirates to make sure that they're involved in the solution created, and they're essentially the ones driving that because they know what's best suited on their land. And from an academia perspective, again, any solution that is created needs to be 100% developed and backed by science. And that is a very important backbone of everything that we do as well.
Thank you, Ms. Leila, and thank you all again. I think we have to conclude because we're over time. Is already, we passed the time. So let's say thank you again for everyone here, and thank you for the panelists.